This painting has been in the same museum in Rotterdam for over 80 years. For 8 of those years, it was a national treasure. Then, without a single brushstroke changing, it became a national embarrassment. Stand here with me a moment and look at it honestly. Today, most people find it heavy-handed, a little awkward, and yet the most trusted Vermeer expert of his day stood where you are standing and called it a masterpiece. You have probably heard this as the story of the man who fooled the Nazis. That story is true, and we will get to it. But it is not the interesting part. The real question is stranger. How do you make an entire field want to be fooled and keep believing even after the forger himself confesses? So this file asks 3 questions. How do you forge not a painting but a theory? Why did a signed confession change nothing? And what does that tell us about how we still decide a masterpiece is real? Let's begin with the version the art world believed, because learned people believed it for good reasons. By the 1930s, Vermeer was among the most beloved painters who ever lived, and one of the most mysterious, because barely more than 30 of his pictures survive. For nearly 2 centuries, he had been half forgotten, rediscovered only in the 1800s, and then adored all the more for how little of him remained. And where the record is thin, longing rushes in, which a patient forger can read like a map. Vermeer was the perfect target. So few pictures, so little known of his life, each one worth a fortune, a market hungry for discoveries, and almost no way to check a new one against the rest. There was one hole in his story the experts most ached to fill. They had long suspected the young Vermeer once traveled to Italy, stood before Caravaggio, and painted sacred scenes before he ever painted a quiet Dutch room. An early religious Vermeer was the missing link they most wanted to find. It was more than a guess. Careful scholars had staked their names on that idea, and a single painting could prove them right. That is a dangerous thing to hope for, because hope quietly tells you what you are about to see. And the field's certainty ran through one man, Abraham Bredius, then in his 80s, the authority whose word on Vermeer was treated as gospel. Colleagues called him, only half joking, the Pope. He was a man who could glance at a canvas and pronounce it genuine in minutes, and treat that verdict as settled fact. And once the Pope had blessed a picture, the rest of the field fell into line behind him. In 1937, the missing link seemed to arrive. A large canvas of Christ at supper in Emmaus reached Bredius through a lawyer, with a story attached. It came from a Dutch family in Italy, in trouble with the fascists, who needed to sell quietly and without names. It was the perfect story, because it explained everything the experts could not. A Vermeer, in Italy, touched by Caravaggio, hidden away for centuries. It was the Vermeer they wanted, the Vermeer they expected, and so, the Vermeer they believed. Bredius had no doubts at all. He published his verdict in the most respected art journal of the day and called it not merely genuine, but the finest Vermeer he had ever seen. A masterpiece, he wrote, straight from the great man's own hand. The Rembrandt Society bought it for the nation, around 520,000 guilders, and hung it in Rotterdam as a crown jewel of the Dutch Golden Age. The next year, it hung among the masters at a great exhibition. Scholars wrote of it, crowds filed past it. For 8 years, every part of this story was true, except the painting. But the file says otherwise, and what it says is absurd. This Vermeer was painted in 1937 by a living man in a rented villa, whom the critics had dismissed as second-rate. His name was Han van Meegeren, and you will usually hear this as a revenge story, a bitter, second-rate painter scorned by the critics, getting his own back. That part is true. But revenge does not explain how he won. He did not beat the experts by outpainting them. He beat them by knowing exactly what they wanted to see. Alone in the south of France, he did not copy a Vermeer. He forged one that could not be disproved. Stop here with me, because this is the real crime. Van Meegeren studied what the experts longed to find and painted exactly that: the religious scene, the Italian shadow, the missing link. Bredius did not so much examine the picture as recognize his own theory looking back at him. Then he did something quietly brilliant. He set his forgery in the one corner of Vermeer's life no painting survives from, a lost early period. It was the perfect hiding place. Every weakness in his own hand could now be read as the master, young and still learning. And he did not just fake the picture, he faked its whole history of wear. Wormholes, yellowed varnish, grime settled into the grooves, even a clumsily repaired tear, the kind of scar only a real 300-year-old survivor would carry. Most tellings stop at the technique, the early plastic, the oven at 120 degrees. The ink worked into the cracks to fake 3 centuries of age, and it is ingenious. But the paint was never the hard part. A patient enough hand can crack any surface. What Van Meegeren really forged was something no laboratory can test for. He forged what the experts already believed. And it worked, again and again. Across the 1930s and into the war, he sold a string of newly discovered old masters, each one certified, celebrated, and quietly written into the story of Dutch art, as though it had always belonged there. The experts were not fooled once. They were building his forgeries into the history books, one glowing appraisal at a time. Which brings us to 1945, and the strangest turn in the whole file. Van Meegeren confessed. He stood up and said the masterpiece was his, and the art world refused to believe him. It was easier to believe a swindler was lying than that the experts had been fooled. The man they called the Pope held to his verdict. His reputation depended on it. And even those with private doubts could not bring themselves to take back the praise they had already sung. To admit the forgery was to admit they had been fooled, and that was the one thing they could not do. So they made him prove it. Under guard, he painted a brand new Vermeer from scratch, while a chemist named Paul Cormans took the older pictures into a laboratory. There, an international panel found what no eye could see. A bottle of the same synthetic resin in his studio, a blue pigment that did not exist in Vermeer's century, ink lying in cracks it could never have reached, and paint too hard, too modern, to be old. The confession had not been enough. It took a laboratory to break the spell. Now step back with me and see what that belief was worth. A forged consensus turns out to be the most valuable thing in the art world, worth far more than the paint it is printed on. Think how many hands had to agree for that to happen. The scholar, the museum, the buyers, the press. A forgery does not fool one expert. It quietly recruits a whole field to vouch for it. That is what made this one so hard to break. And here is the part everyone remembers. The little forger who swindled Hermann Göring and became a folk hero for it. It is a great story, and it is true. But look at what Göring actually bought. Not a canvas. He paid a fortune, and more than 100 looted Dutch paintings for the certainty that it was a Vermeer, the very certainty the whole art world had already signed. Sit with that exchange for a moment. A forgery bought back 100 real stolen pictures. When the war ended, the fake was found in an Austrian salt mine among Göring's hoard, and the trail led straight home to Van Meegeren. And so, in 1945, he was arrested, not for forgery, but for selling a national treasure to the enemy, a charge that could end at the gallows. To live, he had to prove the treasure was worthless. Under guard, with witnesses looking on, he sat and painted one more Vermeer. His whole defense was to commit his crime again, in the open, on demand. That picture even had a name, Jesus, among the doctors, and for weeks, the reporters watched a forger paint his way off the gallows, one careful, aging brushstroke at a time. It worked, because you cannot betray a nation by selling it a treasure that never existed. In 1947, he was convicted only of forgery, sentenced to a single year, and on the 30th of December that year, before he served a day, he died. He died a folk hero, the little man who had fooled Göring and the experts both. In one poll that year, the public ranked him near the most popular figures in the country. The forger had finally got the recognition he always wanted. But the file keeps one more page. Historians who later read his papers found someone colder, an opportunist who sold to the Nazis for profit and wrote his own heroic legend afterward. This is scholarly debate, not a verdict. But notice what it means. Even the hero is a story we chose to believe. And that is the uncomfortable part. The experts were not stupid. They were learned, careful, and completely certain. And certainty, it turns out, is exactly what a forger paints for. We would like to think a laboratory settles it now, that science finally took the judgment out of human hands. But a lab only tells you what a picture is made of. Whether it is a Vermeer, whether it is a masterpiece, is still a decision people make together. The tools are sharper than Bredius had. The trust is exactly the same. And people, then as now, tend to believe what they are already ready to believe. So yes, this is the forgery that fooled the Nazis. But the file says it fooled something bigger. The supper at Emmaus is still in Rotterdam, and it never changed. What changed was the paperwork behind it, and the people willing to sign it. We still decide a painting is real the same way they did. The painting stays the same. You won't. Thank you for watching. This was the story behind the painting, and I'm Marcus Rowe. Keep looking closer.